the essence of DevOps and what it can mean for you and your organization. And I'm going to start by giving a name check to one of my colleagues, Ken Andrew. And Ken is a lean expert and has forgotten more about lean than most of us will ever know. And whenever we get into solution mode in conversations within Global Knowledge, he always brings us back to, well, what a problem is it we're trying to solve? And so first up, I'm going to ask the question, what problems does DevOps solve? Now, there are any number, I guess, of problems, and I'm going to focus on three of them. The first one is workplace flexibility, where organizations now are in a position where the silos that they used to have of specialism in the organization, they're asking people to do more and more and more. And hiring managers are looking for people not only with the depth of expertise in one area, be it development or cutting code or operations or databases or BI or whatever else it happens to be, but they've got a breadth and a flexibility as well in terms of other areas that they know stuff about. So certainly that workplace flexibility is something that we're expecting from hires in the 21st century. The second problem is one that people in IT will be absolutely cognizant of. And the old idea of development throwing stuff over the wall to operations. Code goes over to, well, I was at a conference recently where a guy from Netflix said, yeah, developers throw code and pizza over the wall and they hope that operations eat the right one and deploy the other. Very often you will get the two at loggerheads. Indeed, one organization I've worked with recently talks about the religious wars between development and operations that we need to solve. I think the third problem that I'm going to focus on, though, is the one that is absolutely the most critical for every organization. And that third problem is the amount of time it takes to get a good idea from somebody actually having it, the aha, to us actually giving value to our customer, the ka-ching. They talk about this, the time from the aha to the ka-ching. And that is just way too long in many organizations. Organizations are thinking about getting value from software and from applications and from IT and technology. They're thinking in hours and days, and very often the IT department and the IT people are thinking in weeks and months. And there's that massive disconnect that needs to be solved. So they're the three problems that I'm going to focus on. There are many others that DevOps purports to help to solve. So I guess then the next obvious question is, what actually is DevOps? Well, in some ways, it's this kind of almost holy trinity of taking the development and the operations people from IT, those two warring factions from the last slide, and adding in the quality assurance, the testing function, and bringing them together. As you see there, the arrow in DevOps points to the meeting of those three areas where software, engineering, the development side of the house, the technology, the operations side of the business, and the people ensuring that the quality actually gets there from a testing perspective, where those three meet is where DevOps lives. And the whole thing is designed to get much, much closer to the customer and shift left, as they quite often say, and that we get very much closer to the customer and their needs. So DevOps is kind of a different way of working and breaking down some of those barriers between those four areas. Now, I think looking at what a DevOps environment and a DevOps culture looks like against traditional siloed operations and development probably gives you an idea of where we're trying to get. I'm probably frightened to the life out of a lot of people, if I'm honest. Where the current organizations, we've got lots of skill-centered silos, we've got development people, we've got database people, desktop people, infrastructure people, network people, they all work in their skill-centered silo. In DevOps, we're stripping that down and we're cutting the cake slightly differently, where we're getting people from each of those teams and putting them together in a product-centric team. So you've got almost one from each of those areas, one or more from each of those areas, coming together in a team and focusing on a particular product with their business. We're changing the culture from one of deflecting blame, where something goes wrong in the organization, people's first thought is, prove it wasn't me, prove it wasn't me, prove it wasn't me. Hopefully in a DevOps type of environment, we're looking at anything that does go wrong being part and feeding back from that, and it being part of a learning culture. We want to go from releases of software and hardware and infrastructure from being high risk events that usually focus on nothing went wrong, nothing went wrong, nothing went wrong, more to them being BAU, business as usual type events where we're absolutely focused on the value from the organization. We're hopefully moving away from change scheduling being very centralized, where developers think that the ITIL cab is some sort of demonic organization that they should never go anywhere close to, and that we're decentralizing change and making change much more, and even though we're keeping the governance in place, we're making change much more automatic in an organization. We're taking some of our tooling, where we've got great tools in these skill-centered silos, beautifully used but woefully integrated. In a DevOps environment, we're looking at integrated tool chains, maximum automation, right the way from code being stored, right the way through it being compiled, right the way through it being tested, all the way through to deployment into the live environment. Tool chains to do that. Taking away the on-premise physical machine rooms and going into cloud, going into infrastructure as code. So you've got development and operations people effectively both, well, yeah, coding, development people, application code, and operations people looking at infrastructure as code, creating and destroying virtual environments almost at the drop of a hat. And hopefully what we're getting away from is the silo-based relationships of them and us into a more integrated environment through the adoption of DevOps practices. So that's in a nirvana of DevOps, if you would like. So I guess the next question you're going to ask me is, what underpins DevOps? Well, there's a guy who's one of the godfathers almost of DevOps, called Jez Humble, who came up with this CALMS acronym, where we're looking at culture, we're looking at automation, we're looking at lean practices, we're looking at measurement, and we're looking at sharing, being the sort of 5 pillars of the 5 pillars of DevOps. And I'm going to start with culture. And it's about this new environment where there's trust, there's people focus, there's people taking responsibility and accountability. There's freedom to work within, for people to work and find the best solutions within particular boundaries. It doesn't mean that we're going into anarchy or anything like that, but there's certainly a lot more freedom that drives the DevOps environments, and in particular common goals. And the kind of common goals, I think the best analogy I draw is, I don't know whether this is one of those kind of stories that comes out of the US, and one of those NASA, the NASA janitor story. I've seen several different versions of it, talking about it being different presidents that it happened to. but they went up to the janitor at Cape Canaveral or Houston, and they said, so what's your job? And the janitor says, hey, I'm sending a man to the moon. Everybody working towards that common goal. So culture absolutely drives, and that new culture absolutely drives DevOps, as does automation. Certainly getting from cutting the code to it being deployed as quickly as possible, where code can be developed in numerous different areas. Now, when I say code there, I can mean just as likely that it's infrastructure-based code as it is application code, making sure that we've got continuous delivery of code that can always be deployed, automated testing, the infrastructure environments being built as code, and everything being automated in terms of deployment. So we're looking for some of that speed. So we've got culture, we've got automation, lean. Simply before we do any automation, I've been said for many years, if you automate garbage, you get automated garbage. And so simply leaning down our processes and eliminating waste from our processes through processes like value stream mapping and so on, to make sure that we've got, in very, very agile terms, just enough process to make our deployment processes, our feedback loops, to make them much, much more efficient, and the whole of the process in good solid lean terms absolutely focuses on end user value. So we've got culture, we've got automation, we've got lean practices. We're measuring. Feedback is a massive part of a DevOps environment, and making sure we get feedback on code, on processes, and so on as quickly as possible. So we're not waiting for feedback, and making sure that we've got data that can justify decision making, the right data to drive and inform problem solving, and indeed the right data to validate decisions you made in whether they be the decisions that you made in business cases, or the decisions that you made to solve an issue that the organization was having, that you've got the right data to actually drive that. So we've got culture, we've got automation, we've got lean, and we've got measurement. The final one is sharing, and it's very, very closely allied, I think, to the culture side of things. Open information, making sure that we can visualize work, we've got good communication, we've got collaboration, and we're in a learning organization. These things don't happen overnight, but certainly there's some of the goals that DevOps is aiming towards, and a DevOps environment and culture within an organization. So those of you that have maybe heard some things about DevOps already have perhaps heard some pretty wild claims about it, and kind of very quickly here try and dispel one or two of those myths. The first one, that DevOps is that silver bullet. I've been in IT 30 years, and I've seen people worship a hell of a lot of silver bullets in 30 years. And DevOps is no more a silver bullet than some of these others. Like every approach to IT, it's if it's done properly, if it's done correctly, it's going to work, it's going to improve things, but it's not something that you can just pour onto your IT and to your organization and suddenly it's going to work overnight. As with everything, it's got to be there's got to be some work put in before we hit the success. A lot of DevOps originally, less so in the last 2 to 3 years for certain. A lot of DevOps was focused on tool sets, and automation is a massively important part of what DevOps is about. But it's not just about the tool sets. I've talked to 1 or 2 organizations, and they've said, "Oh yeah, we're starting to do DevOps. We're starting to look at it." And I've said, so what sort of value streams are you working on? Well, we've not actually got that far yet. We've kind of implemented Jenkins and Docker, and we've got Git, and whoa. It's just not all about the tools, in the same way that having stand-up meetings isn't going to make you an agile organization overnight. Then just putting some of the tool sets in place isn't suddenly going to make you a DevOps. Bring about a DevOps culture and practices in your organization overnight. Important, but not everything. DevOps isn't a team. I think, again, I've seen one or two organizations where they've basically said, right, what we're going to do is get rid of silos, and we're going to get rid of development and operations, and we're going to have DevOps teams. Well, hang on, aren't they other silos? And then they end up with 3 silos in their organization: development, operation, and DevOps. And the DevOps team then becomes a very, very useful ally to dev and operations, somebody to blame and somebody to dump stuff on that they don't want. So please, DevOps isn't a team of people, and that's not something that you should ever be doing in your organization. In the same way that Agile isn't anarchy, DevOps isn't anarchy, there's got to be good governance around release in your organizations. If you're in highly regulated industries, then suddenly, because you're doing DevOps, that regulation doesn't disappear. So never ever think of DevOps or Agile and self-organizing teams. Now, these things are only self-organizing within boundaries that you set. So don't ever think that DevOps or Agile is going to be an area where you suddenly have got the shackles are off completely and there are no limits, because there are always going to be limits. And I think one of the most important ones, it's very easy to listen to and go to DevOps summits and listen to organizations talk. But as I was saying to people for years around ITIL and around project management, PMI prints, there isn't one size that fits all in an organization. In the same way, there was no one way to implement change management in ITIL. There was no one way to implement the development lifecycle. There was no one way to implement a project management office. There's no one way to start to adopt DevOps practices in an organization. So, you need to be really, really careful that what you do is absolutely right for you and your organization. Very often, when a new framework or practices come around, people start to think, well, do I throw out all the baby with the bathwater, and do we start from new? Well, certainly DevOps isn't in that particular arena, and the investment that you've made in other areas certainly is going to be absolutely key. The first investment, lean and agile, you would absolutely expect, based on the CARMS acronym, that lean and agile investment that you've already made, whether it be sort of lean IT or whether it be Scrum or other agile methodologies, they're absolutely going to be part of what you're doing within a DevOps culture. And I particularly like this quote from a guy called Rob England. Rob's a New Zealander who, anybody who's been in and around the IT service management working space and DevOps working space for the last few years almost certainly has come across the IT skeptic. And I think he's mellowing slightly in his old age with some more some of his less forthright views, but still as vocal. But I think this is a very, very good tweet that he put onto Twitter probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I unashamedly told him that I was going to steal. That Agile is an approach of working with complex systems anywhere. Lean is an approach of optimizing the flow of work anywhere. DevOps is the application of them to accelerate the value of work through IT, which is what we talked about as one of the issues, perhaps the central issue before, when we looked at what is it that that DevOps is solving. So investment that you've made in lean and agile, not lost as you move into DevOps. From the operations side of the house, what about ITIL? And again, those of you that know anything about DevOps will know the name Gene Kim. Gene's one of the founding fathers of DevOps and wrote the incredibly successful Phoenix Project book, which launched 1,000 DevOps ships. This is a direct quote from Gene when he says that ITIL and IT service management are still the best codifications of the business processes that underpin IT operations, and actually describe many of the capabilities needed in order for IT operations to support a DevOps style work stream. Change management, release management, configuration management, knowledge management, event management, capacity management, they're all in there within DevOps and can be used. And in the best traditions of ITIL, adopt and adapt. It suddenly doesn't mean that you're going to have the CAB meeting, the change advisory board in the middle of DevOps and being automated, but it doesn't mean that you're going to throw away all of that investment that you've made in ITIL as part of DevOps. It's still going to be there, hiding underneath, and the processes that you're going to use. And as I say, so says Gene Kim, one of the founding fathers of DevOps. And one that I've been asked about quite a bit has been TOGAF and people who've made an investment in their enterprise architecture. And I've just kind of got this simple route through it, that your organization drives your enterprise architecture. Your enterprise architecture, the area that TOGAF works in, drives your IT architecture, hardware, software, documentation, and so on. Your IT architecture then drives your software architecture, and DevOps is absolutely helping to the tool that helps to feed back, to support and influence that process. So DevOps and its feedback loops into enterprise architecture, I'm pretty certain that if you can get into that kind of environment, then your enterprise architects will say, come on down to the type of practices that DevOps espouses. So looking at that, I think there's a lot of the investment that you've already made in a number of those areas that looks pretty safe. Okay, if it's sounding cool to you so far, how do you know if you're ready as an organization for DevOps? And I'm going to focus here on 4 very, very people-centric questions. My first one is for you to look at the current culture of your organization. Do you collaborate? Do you share? Do you learn? Do you have people who trust each other? Or as one organization that we work with said to me recently, and I apologize for the European, very, very poor European accent, Barry, we are engaged in the religious wars. And so from that aspect, is it development and operations in that religious war, or have you got are you some way down to the cultural route already? That's going to be a big 1,000 times big consideration for you. Management support. Will your leaders walk the talk? Then you're looking at a new culture, you're looking at new working practices, going out of the old silos, going into something more product-centric in terms of delivery model. Then if the leaders don't encourage that and walk that talk, then they're just basically going to give encouragement and succor to anybody that doesn't want to change in the organization. So it's absolutely crucial that you've got senior management support if you want to get this kind of thing off the ground. Do people understand the need? And I think it is often that DevOps practices are a response to a serious business issue very often, and something that people are looking at. Again, I've mentioned it once already. If you've not already read the Phoenix Project as a book, it is, anybody that's ever worked in IT will recognize so much of what goes on in that particular novel. I think recently in a poll it was voted the most influential DevOps book of all time. So certainly one to go away and have a read of. And I think genuinely, if people do understand what the issue is, then they're far more willing to lend a hand and support the issue. So quite often it is about being transparent within your organization and making sure that people know why it's happening and what the need actually is. And finally, can we ease people's pain? We recognize that change and culture is very, very difficult. And one of the easier ways to make that change more acceptable in any organization is wherever possible, you can utilize existing processes, existing tools, which is why I was at pains to point out the fact that people's investment in lean and agile and people's investment in ITIL and TOGAF are not going to be wasted as part of this. They're going to be in there. It's just different ways of, slightly different ways of organizing the organization and a new culture to get on board with. And we can ease that pain by reusing a lot of what we've already got in place and repurposing a lot of the capability that we've already got in place. Be careful. This is a marvelous acronym that I came across at the DevOps Enterprise Summit about 3 weeks ago in London. Yeah, and somebody said we can't all be FANGs. And the organizations that are very often held up as the kind of beacons of light in the DevOps and Agile arenas, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Netflix, the Googles, they're all very, very new organizations. They've probably got about 50 years of history between the four of them. Many of you will be working for organizations that have got hundreds of years of existence and culture, and that you need to be very, very careful that just because Facebook or Amazon or Netflix work in that particular way, then it isn't necessarily a way that we're going to be able to work on. You can learn a hell of a lot of lessons from these guys, but quite often it's worth listening to a whole range of organizations and experiencing a whole range of organizations that have gone down this path and had some success. I saw at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London, there was a very, very good presentation by the guys from Jaguar, the motor car, the automobile people. And obviously they've got a history to die for, and a reputation. But what they're doing with electric cars and downloading and DevOps really is very, very interesting. And that's in an organization with a rich history. So be careful. We're not all individuals. It reminds me of The Life of Brian. If you've seen that film, that particular slide there, we're all individuals. I'm not. Okay then. Given that this is global knowledge, I'll wager now, Barry, that you're going to talk to me about education. And yes, I am. And the biggest piece of advice I can give to any organization is make your education holistic. Look at the people aspects of education and the organizational change. And for example, there's a very, very good experiential game now, the Phoenix Project, that we're delivering in EMEA and just about to start to deliver into North America, that gets you in a one day fun environment, gets you playing around with DevOps based on the Phoenix Project book. There are the DevOps practices as well. We're one of the registered education partners with the guys at the DevOps Institute. And so there's a whole lot of technology agnostic courses there in and around DevOps, telling you what some of the practices are, taking a deeper look at CARMs, looking at the 3 ways in DevOps, and so on and so forth. There are a hell of a lot of tools that I'm sure some of you have got some of these already: Jenkins, Docker, Kubernetes, Git, and so on. Then there's the specialist DevOps technology that supports the release pipeline. is a third string to that education that you need in and around, and those skills that you need in and around DevOps. So that old triumvirate of people, process, or practice, and technology, and what I call the support disciplines that DevOps needs to enable it to keep going. Things like coding, so Python courses, working in Scrum, your Scrum Master courses, ITIL practitioner, ITIL version 4 coming down the line. That's going to speak a lot more to this type of implementation, and a lot of the cloud courses, things like AWS, and so on and so forth. So I think key is making your education in and around DevOps holistic. You miss out any one part of that, and your solution isn't going to be as effective. So I think as well, think broad, think holistic, think team in terms of your learning. Certainly there are lots of ways of learning that don't just involve courses. We've run hackathons and so on for organizations, games, internal coaching, internal champions, getting the collaboration tools, the visualization of work. They're all going to be part of your continual education. And they're absolutely central to it. So it's not just what an organization like Global Knowledge can offer to you, but also what you can do for yourself to take that education that stage further. I would concentrate very, very much on team skills and team learning. I had a great conversation with Jane Grohl, the CEO of the DevOps Institute, at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London. And we were absolutely aligned in talking about the teams that you have in DevOps working on product areas, maybe being no bigger than 9 or 10 people, and that you've got to have all of those holistic skills within that team. So in some ways, instead of thinking about an individual skill set, let's think about a team skill set, but let's also think about raising the bar of the whole team in particular areas, so that ultimately you're in a position where a dev can stand in for an op can stand in for a dev, a tester can stand in for a dev, and so on and so on and so on, that you get people who are multi-skilled. Genuinely, it's the rise of the specialist generalist in some of those teams. Deep level of knowledge in one area, but also a higher, a good broad level of knowledge in a lot of other areas that particular team and that product stream and that value stream actually need. Okay, then, time for a summing up, and I'm always asked. Our EMEA president, Alan Petman, is absolutely a fan of the law of three. So what are my 3 top tips for DevOps and the way forward? I think be holistic is number 1. Make sure that you approach it from a people, a process or practice, and a technology standpoint. If you miss any one of those out, then I think, as I said before, it's going to be a substandard solution. Know why you're doing it. Start with the why. What problem does DevOps solve? Rather than just saying, right, okay, we're going DevOps. So what problems it's solving? I don't know, but it will. Know what you're going to do. Know how you're going to approach it. Know why you're doing it to start off with. It's the only way that you're ever going to get buy-in. My third one would be start small. One of the biggest discussions that I saw and at the recent DevOps Enterprise Summit was about making the transition of DevOps to the enterprise level and making DevOps work at the enterprise level. And it's a challenge that Agile has been facing for years as well, and one that DevOps is facing. If you ever get the chance to look at some of the stuff that Rob Stroud from Zebia Labs writes, he talks a lot about enterprise DevOps and the sort of things that you can do in there. So big bang in this particular area, trying to change the culture of everybody is so difficult. It's that old phrase, isn't it? How do you eat an elephant? A little bit at a time. Then, so starting small would be a key tip. And I'm sorry, Alan, I need a fourth tip, unfortunately. And my fourth tip is culture change. And it is going to be, I think, in any DevOps adoption, it's going to be the biggest single issue, and certainly not underestimate it. And certainly the guys on the call in North America will recognise this particular Vince Lombardi, the guy who gave his name to the Super Bowl trophy. Then it's certainly going to that quote from him there, the only place that success comes before work is in the dictionary. That is absolutely true, I think, of DevOps.
So we have one question here from David. Are DevSecOps and DevBivOps different kinds of DevOps?
Right, yeah. It's strange that since DevOps has built up, there have been people trying to implement different models of it. And I've even seen people talking about DevOps ops recently and all sorts. The DevSecOps is effectively security. And the whole idea behind DevSecOps, again, it's about incremental, but it's about everybody taking ownership of the fact that security, the way typically that security is being done, sadly, in a lot of organizations, it's ended up being a bolt-on to a solution. You just can't do that in an iterative environment. Security has got to be thought of at the start. It's got to be part of the design. It's got to be part of the iterations and the value streams around DevOps. So DevSecOps has built up around that. So that's effectively the security view of things from a DevOps perspective. DevBizOps is making sure that it isn't just thinking about the development and operations working together. If you remember the slide that I had on early on in the presentation, I was shifting left towards the business, and it's about getting your customer involved in the decision making, in looking at the value of anything that you're doing in IT and getting much closer to them. So the biz is almost a reminder in DevBizOps, get the business involved in this, because if you don't, then it's almost still going to be IT working together to provide something that the business doesn't want or doesn't need. So yes, they are related from a security and a business perspective. There are other other kind of acronyms and so on, and other words and phrases coming up, as I say, DevOps ops and DevOps, and yeah, but they're the two most popular ones that you see, getting the business and security involved.
Okay, next question. Can you provide an example of start small within an organization?
Yeah, I did some work with a small organization in the UK, a local government organization, who effectively they had somebody who very keen within their business part of the organization, a small number of developers and infrastructure people, and they had a particular need where they had employees who were going out to visit people who couldn't use IT and couldn't get in, who were maybe disabled and couldn't easily get into an office of that organization, to go and visit them and interview them and get information so that they got any payments that were due to them much quicker. And what they wanted, rather than go there, take photos and transcribe lots of information, what they wanted was an app that could just go onto an iPad or some sort of tablet, so that they could fill the information in there, and then it could be transcribed straight back into the systems at base and save them a hell of a lot more time. So the value to the business was that those people could see and go out and conduct more interviews in a day. It was quicker for people getting their money, for their customers to get their money in grants and so on and so forth. And there were less transcription errors through doing things that way. And they started working on that in that particular part of the organization. No more than 6 or 7 people tops working on it. And what they found was that they started it out thinking about, how are we going to design the app? They came out of it at the other end with so many improvements to the process and the way they did their process as part of the journey as well. So it really was double-edged sword. So find something small, find something reasonably well contained, find some people who understand it, who are well up for it, and that's a great place to start with it. Whatever you do, don't try and force it on people, because if you try it a second time, it's going to be 50 times as difficult to convince people. You put your hand in the fire the first time and it burnt you. This time it isn't going to burn you. Yeah, right. They're just not going to take that. So start small, find something reasonably well contained to work with.
Okay, so I have another question here. Is the environment really important for DevOps? Well, what if you still have your own hardware but have virtualized its use?
Yeah, and to be honest, it is about it's more about the culture of including the hardware into into the process. The number of times that development say, oh, well, operations just get in the way. The number of times operations come back and say, I wish development had come and asked us first. The guys should be talking. It's about implementing it. If you're implementing that in public cloud, great. If you're implementing that in on-premise, then great. And the idea would be that if you suddenly decide to make that switch from one to the other, then okay, it's new skills to learn, but you've got the team already working together that can make that move from an on-premise virtual environment into maybe an off-site cloud environment, can actually smooth that for particular applications, rather than just say, as we probably do at the moment, operations say, right, we're going cloud next week, get on with it. Then it's certainly a much smoother path. So it's different, but I think a lot of the underpinning around culture and automation where possible, and lean and measurement and sharing, those pillars are exactly the same. And as I said in the presentation, it's going to be different for everybody.
Okay. Does ops include shipping and distribution to the customer / end user? Can you address the IKEA approach using shipping to drive development?
Yeah, I guess you can. Again, it's about looking at that value stream from the idea right the way through to the to the end game, and seeing how you can develop, how you can smooth that process. Where you start and where you end on that value stream is absolutely down to you and your organization. And ending with the customer, I think, and is absolutely the right place to be. So genuinely, I would see, I would have a look at the whole of that value stream and see what is it that we can do to get closer to our customer. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you've got somebody putting together your IKEA furniture at the end of your in your dev team room, but certainly the more that you can include and the closer you can get to the customer, the better your solution is going to be in general.
All right. From the learning team, who needs to help organization to build DevOps capability? What learning models or approaches would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I would look at, I would look at capabilities and the sort of capabilities that you're going to need in your organization. And there are any number of capability models out there. You can have your own very, very simple one. There's the skills framework for the information age, Sophia. So it's looking and maybe using some sort of model to look at, well, what is the skill set that our team is going to need? What are the skill sets that our individuals are going to need within that? And that's about understanding what it is your customer wants, what's your value stream, and then translating that into the skills and capabilities that you actually need. So quite often you would look at that end-to-end stream and say, well, if I'm putting a team together, what skill sets do I need? Where are my single points of failure? Where do I need to up those skill levels? Where do I need the most diversity? And as I say, using a model, using a standard model, whether it's your own that you've invested in, whether it's a model like Sophia and so on, then for certain using that model will guarantee consistency throughout your organization. So find one of those models. Get somebody. I guess we can, some of the things that we can do to help you understand what are the skills that we need within those teams. And it might be different for different teams depending on the tool sets you're using and the and coding languages and so on and so forth.